Hey guys, tonight we slip behind velvet curtains and marble doors into places where kings and heroes of ancient Greece kept secrets that historians only dare whisper about. You're not strolling into a battlefield or a temple. No, this is softer, stranger, and far more intimate. In fact, you probably won't survive this with your innocence intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and the local time. Because let's be real, listening to this in the dead of night hits differently. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the flickering glow of an oil lamp, its wick burning with the faint smell of olive smoke. Marble walls rise around you, decorated with painted vines and heroic scenes. But tonight, the grandeur isn't about statues or temples. It's about hidden rituals, about the way a Greek king might treat his chamber not just as a place to sleep, but as a stage for power, intimacy, and theater. You move slowly, your feet brushing over cool mosaic floors, and you realize this isn't a story of warfare or philosophy. It's one of what happened when the doors closed and the whispers began. Kings were not just rulers, they were men who claimed divine favor. And in a world where gods themselves were famous for wild, complicated affairs, the bedroom of a king wasn't private, it was political. Desire was wrapped up with duty, with myth, with the idea that a ruler was touched by the gods. You sense it in the air. Intimacy wasn't simple here. It was destiny. You imagine stepping through another chamber, hearing laughter muffled by heavy drapery. A servant scurries past, eyes cast down, because servants always knew too much. They carried the linens, prepared the oils, swept away the petals scattered after ceremonies. They were the invisible audience to things you aren't supposed to see. And yet you can see it. You can almost hear it. The rustle of tunics, the soft creak of a bed carved from cedar and ivory. The first thing you notice about these secret worlds is that they are never just about pleasure. No, every glance, every touch carried weight. To lie with someone was to secure a bond, to confirm a pact, or to imitate the very myths carved into temple stone. A king might claim that his passion was modeled after Zeus himself, who, let's face it, could never keep his divine tunic on. And that's where the odd detail strikes you. For all the marble, all the ceremony, these bedrooms were sometimes downright quirky. Imagine a ritual where honey, figs, or even roasted birds were part of the prelude. Not served at a banquet, but right there, in bed. Odd? Absolutely. Yet, to the Greeks, food, fertility, and flesh were tangled threads. Historical fact for you: Greek kings and heroes often claimed their lineages were the result of divine unions. Alexander the Great. You lean against a carved column and listen closer. The walls of these chambers hold echoes of debates that scholars still argue over. Were the rituals of kings truly sacred? Or were they exaggerated tales woven later, turning scandal into legend? One text hints at fertility rites, where queens and kings reenacted divine unions under the cover of secrecy. Another insists those stories are little more than gossip, meant to shame rivals. And here you are, in the middle of those whispers, not knowing what's truth, what's myth, and what was simply too juicy not to write down. As you wander deeper, you start to notice something else. These bedrooms weren't the quiet, private sanctuary. You feel the chill run through you when you realize that privacy was a luxury They didn't believe in the same way we do. And yet, there's something hypnotic here. The golden glow of oil lamps, the smell of incense, the faint hum of a lyre being plucked in the background. It all pulls you into their world. You're not in a history book anymore. You're in the room, watching a king turn the most personal act into a ritual of power. The strangeness lies in how normal this all felt to them. What we might label unbelievable was just life for a ruler who believed his bed was as much a throne as the marble chair in the council hall. The line between sacred and scandalous blurred until no one could tell where devotion ended and indulgence began. You notice the shadows dancing along the wall, stretching, bending like figures in a myth. Maybe they're reenacting Leda and the Swan, or the many conquests of Heracles. Each story gave permission for human rulers to mirror divine passion. And you realize the Greek bedroom wasn't just about love, it was theater. It was myth turned flesh. So you linger here, the lamp flickering lower, hearing the distant waves of the Aegean against stone walls. You feel the hum of history under your skin, the way whispers of silk and the scrape of sandals carried stories that would echo for centuries. And even now, as you stand quietly, you wonder, were you really meant to hear this? Or have you slipped into a place where gods, kings, and desire will always entwine? The night stretches long, and this is only the beginning. The secrets are far stranger than you think. The lamplight flickers lower as you step into another chamber, and suddenly the air feels thicker. You catch the faint scent of roses mingling with smoke from incense cones burning slowly in a bronze dish. This isn't just any chamber. It's the preparation room, the place where rituals of desire began long before a body ever touched a bed. You run your fingers along the cold marble wall, tracing vines painted in curling patterns, and you realize even the architecture wanted to seduce you. You notice the bed draped with dyed linens, deep purples and crimsons that once cost a fortune. They aren't just for comfort, they're signals. Purple meant wealth, control, and connection to the divine. Crimson meant blood, passion, sacrifice. The bed itself becomes an altar, and you are suddenly very aware that here, love was liturgy. And this is where it turns strange. Oils, perfumes, and ointments were prepared like weapons before battle. Kings and heroes bathed in olive oil scented with myrrh, and attendants massaged it into their skin. But they weren't just cleaning up, they were consecrating themselves, turning flesh into something godlike. You picture it clearly, attendants working silently, their eyes lowered, hands smoothing golden oil into broad shoulders, each stroke transforming a mortal body into a divine instrument. The oddest part? Sometimes animals were part of the preparation. Cats stretched lazily near the fire. Doves fluttered in gilded cages, and once in a while, a bull was tethered outside as part of a fertility rite. You pause at the image, the future of dynasties symbolically tied to a beast pacing in the dark. It's unsettling, but for them, it was sacred. A historical fact slides into your ear like a whisper. In Sparta, marriage rituals included a bizarre twist where the bride had her head shaved and was dressed in men's clothing before joining her husband in secret. The act wasn't about romance. It was ritualized, meant to mimic a kind of abduction, as if desire needed to be conquered like a battlefield. You step closer to the bed and notice tiny bowls laid out on a wooden tray. Honey, wine, crumbled herbs. Were they for healing? Maybe, but more often, they were consumed or smeared in patterns across skin as part of the ceremony. Honey wasn't just sweet. It symbolized life, fertility, and the divine nectar of the gods. You almost reach out to dip your finger in it, imagining how sticky sweet it must feel on flesh when you hear soft laughter echo from the hall. It's unsettling because it reminds you that none of this was private. Doors were guarded, attendants stood ready. The king or hero might play the central role, but there were always others nearby, listening, watching. This was performance as much as passion. You shift your gaze and notice a lyre propped against the wall. Music wasn't background noise, it was a script. Plucked notes guided the rhythm of the night, dictating when to move, when to pause. It makes you realize you're not just witnessing intimacy, you're witnessing choreography. Scholars still argue whether these bedroom rituals were truly sacred or just elaborations of court gossip. One school of thought insists that rulers genuinely believed their actions ensured the fertility of land and people. Another suggests it was pure theatre, meant to impress guests, allies, or even rivals. The truth probably lies somewhere between myth and necessity. And then comes the oddest detail yet. You hear a whisper about masks. Yes, masks. Some rituals involved wearing disguises, a hero taking on the likeness of a god, a queen cloaked as a goddess. Sometimes even attendants dressed as mythic creatures. Imagine lying in the shadows, half dreaming, as figures in painted masks moved through firelight, blurring the line between worship and play. It's equal parts unsettling and fascinating, and you can't look away. You glance toward the window, and outside the Aegean gleams silver in the moonlight. The waves lap endlessly against the stone shore, like a lullaby to everything unfolding here. The king's chamber isn't just a bedroom. It's a stage, a temple, and a battlefield, all hidden under the quiet of night. The rituals aren't only about pleasure. They're about proving control over chaos, about embodying the myths carved into marble reliefs. You can almost hear the stories overlapping. Zeus disguising himself to seduce mortals, Apollo dancing with the muses, Dionysus blurring order with madness. Each ritual retold these myths in flesh and candlelight, making the bedroom another theatre of gods. And yet, as the oil burns lower, you feel that the strangest part isn't the food or the music or the masks. It's the simple fact that for these kings and heroes, intimacy was never just theirs. Every touch, every sigh, every ritual had witnesses, both mortal and divine. The night deepens, and you realize you've only pulled back the first curtain. Beyond this room, stranger secrets wait, veiled in incense smoke and soft laughter. The air shifts as you drift deeper into the palace corridors, and the faint echo of sandals against stone carries you into another chamber. The torchlight flickers, bouncing off frescoes where gods chase mortals and mortals chase glory. A dizzying loop of pursuit and surrender. You step inside, and instantly you feel it, the weight of myth pressing against the walls. This isn't just a bedchamber anymore. This is a theatre for gods dressed in human skin. At the center, you spot a massive bed carved from cedar, polished until it glows. The headboard is inlaid with ivory, shaped into spirals and serpents, and the sheets are embroidered with scenes of divine battles. And there, woven in golden thread. You see Zeus descending as a swan, seducing Leda. You smirk because it's almost comically on the nose, a reminder that even kings wanted to borrow the gods' most outrageous love stories. Here's your mainstream fact. Greek myths were more than entertainment. They were blueprints for how people lived, worshipped, and even loved. A king lying in this bed wasn't just indulging in private desire. He was performing myth, embodying Zeus or Apollo, showing his court that he was more than mortal. You suddenly feel as though the room is a shrine in disguise. But then, something odd catches your eye. A chest of costumes, neatly folded, rests against the wall. Tunics in shimmering teal, masks shaped like lions, birds, and even nymphs. It hits you. Roleplay wasn't invented in some modern bedroom. It's ancient, older than the empire itself. Kings and their partners slipped into the skins of gods and monsters, blurring myth with flesh. Imagine a hero walking into this chamber, pulling on a golden mask, and expecting his partner to believe he had become Dionysus for the night. You almost laugh, but the incense makes you dizzy enough to wonder if it actually worked. A shadow moves across the frescoes, and you remember that music was always close by. Somewhere beyond the curtain, a flute pipes low and haunting. The melody bends, lilting between joy and menace. And you think of how easily music guides your body even now. If you were a guest here, your movements would already be dictated by those notes, pulling you into a rhythm you couldn't resist. Scholars still argue whether this was devotion or indulgence. Did these rituals truly connect mortals to divine forces, or was it theater, extravagant, sensual, but ultimately staged? Some say it was both, a spiritual high wrapped inside human desire, a way for kings to convince themselves and others that their actions mattered on a cosmic scale. You stand there, weighing it, realizing the answer might not even matter. What mattered was the performance itself. And then comes the unsettling detail. Wine mixed with herbs, poured into goblets, offered before the night began. Not just ordinary herbs, but stimulants, aphrodisiacs, sometimes even hallucinogens. The drink blurred vision, blurred reason, until the king and his partner swore they were no longer themselves. You imagine lifting one of those goblets, tasting something sharp, bitter, sweet, all at once, and then staring into firelight until gods walked into the room. You turn toward the frescoes again, and one scene pulls you in. Heracles, the strongest of heroes, resting not with weapons but with a lover in his arms, his lion skin draped carelessly across the floor, his club forgotten in the corner. The image is almost tender, almost human, yet it's framed as divine. It reminds you that these rituals weren't just about force. Sometimes they were about surrender. And yet, the oddest thought strikes you now. Privacy was never the point. Behind curtains, attendants lingered, musicians played, incense was refilled, every kiss, every embrace unfolded with silent witnesses. You shiver at the thought that even the most intimate gestures were orchestrated for an audience, both seen and unseen. The chamber hums with layered voices, the whisper of gods in myth, the low laughter of attendants, the music drifting like smoke. And standing in the middle, you feel caught between reality and story, as though you've stepped directly into a play that never ends. The bed looms larger now, and the air seems heavier. But you know the strangest rituals are yet to come. You've seen the costumes, smelled the incense, heard the music, but soon you'll learn what truly unfolded when mortals played gods behind gilded curtains. The chamber darkens, though no torch has gone out. It's as if the shadows themselves lean closer, waiting to share a secret. You breathe in the incense, and this time it's stronger, sharper, almost metallic. Your chest tightens, and for a fleeting moment, you wonder whether the ancient mixture was designed to do exactly that: strip away resistance, heighten sensation, open the mind to suggestion. At the far end of the room, another door creaks open. You hesitate before crossing the threshold, but curiosity drags you forward. Inside, the space is narrower, almost suffocating. Clay jars line the walls, their surfaces painted with spirals and strange figures. Some human, some beast, some trapped in between. The act of intimacy wasn't just indulgence. It was framed as holy transaction. Give to the gods, and they would bless the union. But here's the unspoken part, the thing few textbooks admit. Sometimes the offering wasn't food or blood. Sometimes it was performance itself, lovers reenacting divine unions for the gods' unseen eyes. You close your own eyes for a moment, and the sounds come alive. The flute is joined by drums, steady and low, like a heartbeat. Sandals scuff against the floor. A chant rises, layered and strange, words you can't quite understand, but feel in your bones. It builds, filling the narrow chamber until you almost believe the jars themselves are vibrating. And then, an object catches your attention. A golden phallus, tall and gleaming, resting on an altar draped in linen. It's stylized, more symbol than body, but its presence is unmistakable. The cult of fertility was never hidden in ancient times. It was celebrated, exaggerated, worshipped. Here you realize, sex was not shame. It was spectacle, devotion, power. To stand near this altar was to stand at the crossing point between human desire and divine creation. But it doesn't stop there. Draped beside the altar is a rope, braided thick, dyed crimson. You feel uneasy. Rope can bind, can pull, can control. Some historians whisper that such tools weren't only decorative, but functional, woven into rituals of dominance and submission. Picture a king, bound by his queen, in imitation of Hera chaining Zeus, or attendants restraining a participant to heighten the drama, while music masked cries that might have been pleasure or something else entirely. A chill slips down your spine as you realize this wasn't always private passion. It was often collective. The room suddenly feels crowded. You imagine priests, attendants, partners, musicians, all converging here, each playing a role. Some watching, some touching, some simply ensuring the ritual reached its peak. It's hard to tell if this was intimacy at all, or theater so immersive that no line remained between spectator and participant. The walls themselves seem to whisper now. You lean closer and notice scratched markings, crude drawings carved into the stone. Some are unmistakably erotic, shockingly explicit even by modern standards. Others look like instructions, positions, gestures, arrows guiding movement like choreography. You wonder if this was an ancient manual, a reminder that ritual was not chaos, but carefully staged spectacle. And then, the strangest discovery of all, masks, again, but these are grotesque. Long noses, wide mouths, exaggerated eyes. Their features look comical at first, until you realize they're designed to disturb. You hold one up, and for a moment, staring through its hollow gaze, you understand. To wear it was to shed identity, to become faceless, godlike, monstrous. What happened behind these masks might never be traced to the human wearing them. Your pulse quickens. You feel as if the air itself is pressing against your skin, urging you to imagine more than you should. You set the mask down, but its hollow smile lingers. The music outside grows louder now, the flute shriller, the drumbeat relentless. You step back into the main chamber, and suddenly the space feels alive with phantoms, dancers, priests, gods. Every corner hums with stories too bold to put in stone, too dangerous to write on papyrus. This was no mere indulgence. This was theater, worship, spectacle, and sometimes something far darker. You begin to realize why so little of it survived in clean, official histories. Some truths were meant to be hidden behind curtains, whispered only through ritual. And yet, standing there, you can't help but wonder what part comes next, because you haven't yet seen the most dangerous ritual of all. The drums don't stop. They quicken, pulsing harder until your own heartbeat struggles to keep pace. You step deeper into the chamber, and the air grows thick, almost syrupy with incense. The walls are closer now, as if you've descended into the womb of the ritual itself. You sense that this is the forbidden room, the place where the whispers of history stop and the rumors begin. At first, you notice the bedding, not one mattress, but many. Woven mats, animal hides, layered thick across the floor. The sheer quantity shocks you. This wasn't meant for two people. It was a stage, an arena, a gathering ground. The mainstream fact slips in here. Ancient Greek symposiums, those all-male drinking feasts, often blurred into spaces of intimacy, where philosophy and desire mixed like wine and honey. Everyone knows that, but in royal settings, those symposiums could transform into orchestrated nights of ritual. Not a party, not an orgy exactly, but something more structured. Some scholars even suggest kings choreographed these nights as performances of wealth and power, where their control extended into the very bodies of those present. You sink onto the edge of a mat and notice something strange. Bowls placed nearby, each one filled with herbs, oils, powders. You pick one up and sniff cautiously. The sharp, almost bitter aroma floods your nose. These weren't perfumes. They were stimulants, or perhaps relaxants, brewed from plants whose names are long forgotten. Imagine drinking wine laced with henbane or mandrake. Imagine the altered state, the visions that might follow. And then imagine being guided, pushed even, into ritual while your mind spun out of control. Here's the odd detail. Some jars show markings of the Greeks did experiment with exotic aphrodisiacs, but this concoction feels desperate. You picture kings and their attendants swallowing such mixtures, desperate to sustain hours of ritual, bodies driven past natural limits. And this is where the debate crackles like a live ember. Scholars still argue whether these bedroom rituals were spiritual initiations designed to open a channel to the divine, or simply state-sponsored spectacles to display dominance. Were kings seeking visions of gods through physical extremes, or just flaunting their human power by orchestrating desire as if it were an army under command? The line blurs, and you're left unsettled. The shadows shift, and you see ropes again. Not decorative now, stained, frayed, knotted. You trace your hand over one, and a sickly thought crawls into your mind. Restraint wasn't symbolic here. Someone was bound. Someone played the role of the powerless, perhaps a captive, perhaps a volunteer seeking glory through suffering. Imagine the whispers. To be chosen was to be honored, or to be humiliated. And then the masks. Not comedic this time, but heroic. They hang neatly on hooks. Hercules, Perseus, Achilles. Each mask is carved with beauty and fury, the features of legends. You realize participants may have worn them, role-playing as gods or heroes, merging themselves with myths. You wonder, what was it like to surrender your own name, your own skin? And you sit quietly, trying to calm your racing thoughts, but the chamber won't allow peace. Every bowl, every rope, every mask screams at you that this was not a gentle ritual. It was endurance, theater, sometimes cruelty disguised as sacredness. The music reaches a frenzy, flutes shrieking, drums pounding like war. Your breath shortens. For a moment you swear you hear voices in the smoke, chanting, moaning, crying. You can't tell if it's ecstasy or agony. Maybe both. And you finally understand why history left this room unrecorded. Too scandalous to teach, too dangerous to preserve. Better to let it rot under the palace stones than admit kings mixed gods and flesh in ways that could shatter the polite stories we tell of them. But you're here now, sitting in the haze, surrounded by ghosts of pleasures and terrors. And you know the journey isn't finished. There's another chamber waiting. One even darker. Incense lingers, but now a draft slips across your skin. Cooler, damp, like air pulled from a hidden underground. You rise, the mats and masks fading behind you, and step toward the sound of trickling water. The chamber narrows, stone walls brushing close against your shoulders, until suddenly it widens again, opening into what feels like a subterranean shrine. The first thing you notice is the centerpiece, a low altar, carved from pale marble, streaked with old stains. It isn't blood red, not anymore, more a rust brown, dried into the grooves of the stone. Your pulse quickens. You already know this place is about fertility. But fertility in the ancient Greek sense wasn't just romance or reproduction. It was tied to life and death, harvest and famine, sacrifice and survival. A mainstream historical fact rises up. Ancient Greek fertility cults, especially those honoring Demeter and Dionysus, often involved secret rites where food, drink, and the Eleusinian mysteries are the most famous, where initiates were sworn to secrecy about what they saw. You realize this room could have been a private echo of those public mysteries, except here, kings rewrote them into their own rituals of power. Your eyes drift to the walls, where faint paintings glow under torchlight. Women with grain sheaves, men with torches, a figure plunging into darkness, only to emerge reborn. And below them, a smaller detail catches your attention. But mixed among them are stranger things: animal bones, feathers, and what looks disturbingly like small carved effigies, bound with twine. Were these symbolic? Or were they substitutes for something more human? And here comes the quirky detail. A jug sits cracked in the corner, decorated with a scene of goats mating. Not unusual for Dionysian art, except someone has scribbled crude graffiti over it, a set of laughing faces, mocking the solemnity of the ritual. You can almost hear the drunken snickers of attendants who couldn't resist breaking the seriousness with obscene humor. Even in sacred chambers, someone always tried to turn mystery into mischief. You turn back to the altar, and now you see the grooves cut into its surface, not random scratches, channels. designed to let liquid, wine, oil, or perhaps blood, flow across and drip into basins below. Your stomach twists. Suddenly, the fertility ritual doesn't feel so harmless. The debate tightens around your mind. Scholars still argue whether royal rituals of fertility required symbolic sacrifice or literal offerings. Some point to records of animals, goats or bulls, used in blood rites. Others whisper about darker possibilities, initiates pushed beyond endurance, even unwilling participants offered up for the king's sacred performance. Was it theatre, sacrifice, or something blurred in between? The truth lies buried in smoke and silence. The flutes return, softer now, winding like vines around the chamber. Shadows move at the edges of your sight, shapes dancing in a slow, deliberate rhythm. You imagine it, attendants circling the altar, robes dyed saffron and indigo, bodies glistening with oil, chanting hymns to Demeter or Aphrodite. Their voices low, their steps heavy, their movements meant to mimic planting, harvesting, rebirth. And at the center, the king himself, enacting the role of the fertile god. You hear the imagined sounds, the pouring of wine, the crack of seed pods scattering across stone, the shuddering cries of someone bound to the altar, not necessarily in pain, but in submission, surrender, desire and sacrifice mixing until you can't tell one from the other. And then, in the corner of your vision, a stone basin filled with water. You step closer and realize the water isn't clear. It's tinted deep, as if wine has been mixed with it, a symbol of abundance, or perhaps a ritual cleansing, where bodies were washed after the act, sins and sweat alike dissolving into the basin. You crouch down, dip your hand in, and feel the chill climb up your arm. For a moment, you imagine the kings plunging in, emerging renewed, as though baptizing themselves into godhood. But you also sense the weight of something darker, that the water carries more than wine. You step back quickly, heart racing. The chamber presses on you, too close, too alive with ghosts. Fertility and sacrifice, they were two sides of the same coin, and you've just seen how easily kings blurred them into rituals meant to both terrify and awe. And as you leave, the drums rise again, louder this time, summoning you toward yet another chamber. A chamber where desire would no longer be wrapped in symbols of crops or rebirth, but staged as theater of power for those watching. You follow the pulse of drums, and this time it's not muffled or secret. It booms openly, as though the walls themselves are vibrating, as though an audience waits just beyond the next arch. You step through and emerge into a chamber that feels more like a theater than a shrine. Benches line the sides, low stone seats facing inward toward a raised platform at the center. Torches burn brighter here, gilding every curve of marble with liquid firelight. The air smells less of incense and more of oil lamps, sweat, and anticipation. This wasn't hidden worship. It was staged ritual, a spectacle of desire and power. The mainstream historical fact settles into place. The Greeks loved theater, and their religious life was often performed in public. Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, was the patron of theater itself. Plays weren't just entertainment. They were rituals, performed as offerings. So when kings staged their private performances, they weren't only indulging themselves, they were mimicking gods, turning intimacy into a show of divine authority. You picture it vividly, the king stepping onto the central platform, clad in robes of shimmering indigo edged with gold thread, A mask carved into the likeness of Dionysus strapped across his face. Around him, attendants dressed as satyrs and maenads whirl, bodies painted with grapevines and ivy. They laugh too loudly, their movements deliberately wild, mocking yet worshipful. The quirky detail pulls your eyes to the floor itself. Intricate tiles form a mosaic of vines and animals, but one corner has an odd patch where the original design was replaced with something cruder. Two figures locked in an embrace, their limbs oddly exaggerated. Was it meant as a bawdy joke slipped in by artisans, or was it deliberate? Then the performance begins, at least in your mind's ear. You hear chanting, the rhythm building as attendants pour wine onto the platform, the liquid splashing across tiles like blood. The king raises his arms, a cup of mead spilling foam down his wrist, and the crowd, advisors, nobles, perhaps even chosen guests, cheer softly, reverently. What they are about to watch is both shocking and sacred. You notice how the torches are arranged, not scattered, but focused inward, so that shadows converge on the central platform, spotlighting the king. The crowd sits in relative darkness, their faces hidden. Only the performer is revealed, exalted, vulnerable, and powerful at once. And this is where the scholarly debate creeps in. Scholars still argue whether such performances were symbolic theatre, ritualized gestures and dances, or as they crossed into real acts of Some claim the masks, the music and the wine blurred the lines so completely that it hardly mattered. Performance became reality, and reality dissolved into myth. You can almost hear the whispers from the benches, nobles murmuring approval, others pretending not to look too closely, some secretly thrilled to see their king embody a god of desire. The mix of reverence and voyeurism fills the chamber, a cocktail of awe and unease. And then the attendants join in, not fully, not as equals, but as echoes. They might enact scenes of planting and harvest, of pursuit and capture, their bodies miming the dramas of myth. You imagine a woman masked as Persephone being pulled into darkness, while another in Demeter's guise raises her arms in grief. These aren't random plays, they're coded rituals, retelling myths of love, abduction, and return, through movement, sound, and flesh. Another odd detail. Hanging from the ceiling are clay lanterns shaped like fruit, pomegranates, grapes, figs. They sway gently, casting rounded shadows across the walls. In this place, even the light itself feels suggestive, dripping with innuendo. You lean forward, almost holding your breath. The rhythm of drums grows faster, more insistent. The wine pours heavier, the chants louder. And then silence falls. The king alone stands at the center, chest heaving, mask gleaming. He gestures, grand, theatrical, and the attendants freeze. This is his climax, not just of ritual, but of performance. A king's power wasn't just to fight wars or issue decrees. It was to embody the myths, to become a bridge between mortal and divine, to prove he alone could hold the gaze of gods and mortals alike. You feel a strange mix of discomfort and awe, as if you've been watching. By turning desire into performance, the king reminded his court that he wasn't just a man. He was theatre, he was myth, he was power itself staged under firelight. The torches sputter, wine drips onto tiles, and the crowd exhales at last. The performance dissolves into applause, low and reverent. Attendants gather the props, Masks are lowered, and the audience files out in silence, each carrying their own unspoken thoughts. You remain behind a moment longer, your ears still ringing with the phantom drums. You realize the ritual wasn't just about sex or even about fertility. It was about control. Control of narrative, of myth, of bodies on stage. And for the king, it was the ultimate proof. If he could command even desire itself, he could command anything. The drums fade into nothingness, but already another sound calls you onward. Not applause this time, but whispers. Softer, more intimate, coming from behind yet another passage. A place where theatre ends and the secret chambers of power begin again. You slip through the narrowing passage, away from the echo of drums, and the air shifts again. The open theatrical space dissolves, replaced by something quieter, more intimate. The torches burn lower here, and the glow is warmer. Softer, as if meant not for spectacle, but for secrecy. You feel the hush immediately. This was where alliances were struck, not on battlefields, but in beds. The mainstream historical fact comes to mind. In the courts of ancient kings, marriages and liaisons weren't just personal choices. They were political weapons. A union could seal peace between warring factions, or a secret affair could tilt power away from one rival and toward another. The Greeks were no exception. Kings and heroes, whether mortal or semi-divine, knew that a whispered promise in the bedroom could carry more weight than a shouted oath in the council hall. You find yourself standing in what feels like a royal chamber, then stripped of grandeur. The bed is raised on a wooden platform, draped with woven blankets dyed in russet and teal, the fabrics catching glints of gold thread. A bronze basin sits nearby, water still rippling faintly as though recently disturbed. The atmosphere carries the faint tang of oil and honey, scents meant to soothe, to entice, to prepare. Here, intimacy wasn't only pleasure, it was transaction. A king might lie with a rival's daughter, securing her loyalty and, through her, a claim on new territory. A general might share a bed with his commander's consort, weaving whispers into a net of influence. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate moves, as calculated as military maneuvers. For quirky detail, on a low table sits a tiny ivory figurine of two doves locked beak to beak, wings folded together. Its purpose isn't clear. Was it a charm for love? A gift from one secret lover to another? Or perhaps just a toy, left behind after a moment of indulgence? The smallness of it contrasts sharply with the magnitude of what such chambers meant. You imagine the negotiations. Words murmured against a shoulder. Promises sealed with kisses rather than contracts. The room itself becomes a council chamber. Except here, power is traded in sighs and silences, in the way a hand lingers or retreats. And the risks? Immense. For every alliance forged, there was the danger of discovery. A jealous spouse, an ambitious rival, a spurned lover. Any one of them could unravel not only the relationship, but the very stability of a kingdom. Scholars still argue whether some of the most famous alliances in Greek history were sparked in such settings. Did Helen of Troy's fabled beauty ignite a war merely because of her face, or because her bedroom was the true center of power long before ships set sail? Did Alcibiades, the scandal-prone Athenian, truly sway policies through whispered seductions, or was his reputation exaggerated by gossiping rivals? What is clear is that when power met desire, the outcomes reshaped history. The chamber around you seems to breathe with these whispers. You hear laughter, not light, but low, deliberate, conspiratorial. You see two figures leaning close on the bed's edge, voices muffled, hands brushing. They are not lovers, not entirely. They are players in a game too dangerous to play in the daylight. One promises support in the next council vote, if only the other will keep their tryst secret. Another offers a dowry of land, disguised as affection. Every sigh carries with it a contract, every touch a treaty. You realize this is where empires were made fragile. On the soft edge of a pillow, in the shadows of silk. Another odd detail catches your eye. Scratched faintly into the bed frame are symbols, tiny, almost invisible, like coded marks. Perhaps initials of past meetings, or a ritual of memory between partners, or perhaps simply the idle carving of someone anxious during a forbidden embrace. Either way, the wood remembers what history books often forget. You notice how the guards are absent here. No clang of bronze, no watchful eyes. That too is deliberate. Privacy wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity for these rituals of politics. The more hidden, the more powerful the whispers became. You feel yourself intruding, as though even standing in this chamber risks exposure. And then you imagine what came after. Secrets carried beyond the bed, rumors spreading in the market, gossip turning into weapons sharper than swords. One careless word whispered by a servant could topple a hero's reputation. One night too many spent in the wrong bed could undo years of careful rule. Desire and betrayal were twin threads, woven tightly into the same fabric. The fire crackles low, almost as if mocking the vulnerability of kings who thought themselves gods. You realize the irony. Men who could command armies, who could storm cities, were often undone, not on the battlefield, but here, in moments of softness, of secrecy, of weakness disguised as intimacy. You step back, giving the chamber its silence again. The basin still ripples faintly. The figurine still rests with its eternal kiss. The bed still holds the weight of history, and you can't help but think, this wasn't just about lust or ritual. It was about the dangerous bargain that comes when power is traded in whispers, when kingdoms are gambled in the dark. As you leave the chamber, you hear another sound ahead. Not laughter, not whispers, but something sharper. The metallic scrape of armor, the breath of warriors. The next space promises something less private, less tender, and far more dangerous. The clash of power, not in whispers, but in force. You step from the intimate hush of the royal chamber into a long, echoing hall. For kings and heroes, the bedroom could double as a stage where courage, stamina, and hierarchy were tested. Elite men sometimes used erotic rituals as a means to affirm alliances, assert superiority, or even punish rivals in ways that were both intimate and politically potent. You see the bed now, large and elevated, draped with heavy fabrics in russet and teal, gilded threads catching the flickering torchlight. Around it, warriors flex and stretch, muscles taut and shining. The air is thick with anticipation, the scent of oil, incense, and sweat mingling in a heady haze. You realize that this is both a place of pleasure and of ritualized power, a theater of dominance where bodies communicate as forcefully as words ever could. The quirky detail, a small bronze mirror lies at the head of the bed, angled so participants can watch themselves in action. Perhaps it was a tool for self-awareness. Perhaps a charm to ensure skill and appearance were maintained, or perhaps simply a reminder that every act here was being performed under a silent, observing gaze. The reflection of every motion amplifies the tension, turning personal acts into public statements of capability. Scholars still argue whether some of the more notorious stories of Greek heroes, like Heracles, exploits, or the secret liaisons of Alexander the Great, were exaggerated to elevate their sexual prowess as a marker of leadership. What is clear, however, is that these rituals were codified, expected, and deeply symbolic. Sex in these contexts wasn't merely desire, it was ritual, performance, and social strategy intertwined. You notice the participants are methodical. Some actions are playful, others intense. The gestures are deliberate, each movement carrying meaning beyond mere pleasure. To master the ritual was to assert authority, to show control over oneself and over others, and to reinforce a hierarchy that the entire court acknowledged silently. The interplay of power here is palpable. Even a misstep could shift respect and influence, altering alliances that extended far beyond the chamber. The bedposts bear carved symbols, lines, spirals, and depictions of animals known for strength and cunning. Perhaps these were talismans, or mnemonic devices, or simply the marks of men and women who had passed through, leaving their presence behind. The carvings hint at an underlying belief that sexual acts, when entwined with symbolism, could channel strength, bestow favor, or even influence fate itself. The atmosphere is electric, punctuated by low laughter, whispers, and the occasional sharp exhalation. You sense that, while these acts may seem indulgent or even decadent from the outside, each movement, each touch, each glance was loaded with meaning, an unspoken code understood by all present. Another odd detail emerges. A small bundle of herbs lies at the foot of the bed, perhaps aphrodisiacs, perhaps protective charms. Their pungent aroma mingles with the scents of oil and sweat, creating a heady, almost intoxicating environment. Every sense is engaged, every detail calculated to heighten intensity, focus energy, and assert dominance or submission as required by the ritual. The energy of the room is almost palpable. Here, kings and heroes are both spectators and participants, performing for one another, learning from each other, testing boundaries, and affirming hierarchies. Even the quietest observer could feel the unspoken tension, the dance of power hidden beneath the guise of intimacy. As the ritual reaches its zenith, you sense the layers of meaning behind each action. It is not just the act itself, but the performance, the skill, and the mastery of both body and social expectation that matters. Dominance, desire, authority, and secrecy all converge in this space. The bedroom becomes a battlefield where the weapons are subtle and the victories, though quiet, are profound. Finally, as the intensity subsides, the participants relax, sweat, mingling with candlelight reflections. The chamber holds traces of exertion, the carved symbols standing as witnesses to the events. You step back, feeling the charged quiet that follows, a moment of afterglow, where the politics, power, and ritual as the night settle into the room's very walls. Ahead lies a different kind of chamber, quieter but no less significant, the personal aftermath, where reflection, vulnerability, and intimate truths intertwine with the consequences of the previous acts. You enter a quieter chamber, where the echoes of earlier exertions fade into a hushed, almost reverent atmosphere. Here, the grand gestures and public performances give way to something more intimate: solitude, reflection, and subtle consequences. The room is smaller, lined with tapestries depicting hunting scenes and legendary feats, amber torchlight dancing across gilded threads. The bed, though the same as before, feels different now. Less a stage, more a place of aftermath and contemplation. The mainstream historical fact: in ancient Greek culture, sexual rituals often carried post-performance reflection, both physically and socially. Kings and heroes would retreat to private quarters or separate chambers to process what had occurred, sometimes engaging in meditation, bathing, or discreet conversations with confidants. These quieter moments were considered crucial for maintaining mental clarity, social composure, and even physical readiness for upcoming challenges. You notice a low bench against the wall, where vessels of water and scented oils are arranged carefully. The scent of lavender, rose, and myrrh mingles with the lingering aroma of incense and sweat. A hero dips his hands into the cool water, washing away the traces of ritual while pondering lessons learned. Perhaps it is pride, perhaps guilt, perhaps simple fatigue, but each movement feels deliberate, meditative, and charged with meaning. The quirky detail, a small bronze statuette of Eros, sits on the mantel, its tiny wings gilded in gold. Some say these statuettes were used as reminders that even in private reflection, love, desire, and human connection carry lessons worth noting. Others whisper they served as subtle guides, offering symbolic instruction on how to balance passion with restraint, a lesson every king and hero needed. Scholars still argue whether certain post-ritual behaviors, like brief isolation or whispered exchanges with attendants, were formalized expectations or mere personal habits. Evidence from surviving accounts suggests that a combination of tradition and personal preference shaped these reflective practices, making them as varied as the individuals themselves. The chamber's walls, adorned with intricate mosaics of gods and mortals, seem to watch over these moments. You see a hero, reclining, gazing at the ceiling, fingers tracing the gilded outlines of mythic figures. Perhaps he draws inspiration. Perhaps he measures his own deeds against the tales of divine exploits. The quiet is punctuated only by soft exhalations and the subtle clink of water in ceramic bowls. Another odd detail emerges. A folded piece of parchment rests beside the bed, bearing notes on past rituals or observations on technique, stamina, or social dynamics. Writing after intimacy may seem mundane, but for Greek kings and heroes, documenting performance was a way to ensure mastery, maintain memory, and convey lessons to those who would follow. Even the most private acts had ripples that extended outward in both social and historical terms. You notice that some participants engage in gentle conversation, exchanging observations with trusted companions. Whispered laughter, soft admonitions, and cautious advice flow as naturally as the water used to cleanse hands. Here, power dynamics remain subtly in play. Every glance, every comment is measured for meaning and effect. The lessons of the public ritual are internalized and refined, building a layered understanding of social, physical, and emotional interplay. The bed's gilded carvings catch the firelight one last time, It is a visual codex, merging ritual, art, and personal reflection. You realize that even in private, the environment reinforces lessons about desire, control, and reputation. As you linger, you sense a subtle shift. What began as performance transitions into introspection, where heroism and humanity intersect. Kings and warriors contemplate choices made, consequences faced, and strategies for maintaining influence, intimacy, and personal balance. This post-ritual phase is not less important than the ritual itself. It is where wisdom, memory, and foresight converge, shaping future actions in both bedroom and battlefield. Finally, the torches flicker lower, shadows stretching across the chamber like fingers of night. Participants rise, wash once more, and quietly leave the space, leaving behind only the faint scent of oils, herbs, and lingering warmth. The room, though emptied, holds an invisible record of lessons learned. Challenges met. You sense that understanding these after effects is essential to grasping the full complexity of Greek kings and heroes' intimate rituals. You find yourself stepping back into the social sphere, where the echoes of private rituals ripple outward into the broader world of courtly expectation and heroic reputation. The hallways of palaces and fortresses are lined with attendants, scribes, and advisors, all subtly attuned to the nuances of kings' and heroes' behaviors. What happens behind closed doors rarely stays there entirely. Rumors, whispers, and careful observations travel faster than footsteps. The mainstream historical fact: in ancient Greece, the private conduct of rulers and celebrated warriors often directly influenced their public standing, alliances, and marriage negotiations, as well as the perception of divine favor. Even seemingly mundane bedroom practices could bolster or undermine social authority. You notice a young scribe hovering near the throne room, quill in hand, subtly noting gestures, expressions, and overheard phrases. The quirky detail: some scribes maintained a private codex of heroes' habits, including personal and intimate behaviors, supposedly to advise kings or warn rivals. This may seem intrusive, but in a society where reputation intertwined with divine sanction, every action counted. Scholars still argue whether such codices were widespread or reserved for the most politically significant individuals, but evidence hints that awareness of private conduct shaped decisions, alliances, and ceremonial expectations. A hero enters the Great Hall, still wearing the faint scent of oils and herbs from the earlier chamber. Courtiers pause, evaluating posture, gaze, and the subtle marks of preparation. Even a fleeting glance can communicate endurance, vigor, or restraint, qualities that were admired, critiqued, and sometimes feared. You watch as whispered exchanges ripple through clusters of attendants and family members, a delicate choreography of observation and interpretation. The hall's decorations amplify this social scrutiny. Frescoes depicting divine judgment, heroic feats, and moral lessons remind all present that public perception is inseparable from personal conduct. Golden highlights on shields, weapons, and ceremonial furniture gleam under torchlight, reflecting both literal and figurative attention to detail. Another odd detail emerges: a small, seemingly innocuous mirror placed near a doorway is rumored to allow attendants to observe body language discreetly, further entwining intimacy with politics. You see a king engage in measured conversation with a visiting envoy, gestures controlled, voice modulated, eyes alert, though he has just left a private ritual. These social rituals, you realize, are extensions of private acts. Mastery in the bedroom translates into perceived mastery in leadership, diplomacy, and combat. A scholar's debate lingers in your mind. Did private rituals genuinely enhance political efficacy, or were they largely symbolic, reinforcing pre-existing hierarchies? The interplay between private practice and public perception is nuanced, as some heroes who deviated from expected conduct faced social censure, while others gained reputation for prowess or exceptional endurance. You notice small tokens placed on tables, gifts, ceremonial cups, and carved figurines, each representing alliances, favors, or subtle commentary on character. Observers interpret these symbols alongside the individual's behavior, merging tangible objects with ephemeral impressions. A queen or rival may study these interactions carefully, noting alliances, loyalty, and subtle indications of temperament. Another quirky observation: some guests carry small charms or amulets, rumored to ward off envy, misfortune, or the spiritual consequences of observing intimate acts. While practical efficacy is questionable, the psychological impact on courtly interactions is significant, reinforcing vigilance, prudence, and the performative nature of all social gatherings. You watch as the king's aides subtly manage the flow of conversation, ensuring decorum while allowing room for status signaling. The balance of power is delicate, where humor, flattery, and observation intersect. Every comment, glance, and gesture is imbued with meaning, a direct extension of the discipline, awareness, and attentiveness cultivated in private spaces. As the evening progresses, you realize the heroes and kings' intimate behaviors inform alliances, marriages, and political maneuvering, illustrating the deep interconnection of personal mastery, societal expectations, and narrative memory. Even after hours pass, stories of endurance, restraint, or unusual practice echo subtly through the corridors, shaping perceptions for months or years to come. The hall gradually empties, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with impression and inference. You understand that to grasp the full context of these ancient practices, one must appreciate both the intimate, private moments and the public echoes they create. For in Greek society, power, intimacy, and reputation are inseparable. You linger on the edge of memory and myth, where the private acts of Greek kings and heroes dissolve into legend, echoing in poems, songs, and whispered tales. Even long after the curtains close and the chambers empty, stories of these intimate rituals ripple outward, shaping perception, expectation, and moral imagination. The mainstream historical fact: in ancient Greece, the blending of personal behavior with public narrative contributed to enduring cultural myths, preserving lessons about heroism, morality, and divine favor. What mortals did in private often became exaggerated in public retellings, their actions transformed into allegorical examples of virtue, vice, or divine intervention. You notice the peculiar ways these stories are transmitted. Scribes and storytellers exaggerate certain details, highlight peculiar habits, or invent entire episodes, blending fact and fiction. The quirky detail: some heroes were rumored to have consumed unusual potions or performed bizarre nightly rituals, not just for pleasure, but as tests of courage that bards would later dramatize in epic recitations. Scholars still argue whether these tales were based on real practices or purely narrative invention. But either way, they shaped societal understanding of heroism and morality. In the shadowy corners of courts and academies, philosophers debate the meaning of these acts, questioning whether discipline in private chambers reflects innate virtue or merely social performance. You wander through these philosophical halls in thought, observing subtle gestures and symbolic artifacts. A carved bedpost here, a ceremonial cup there, all of them preserved or recreated in art to communicate lessons across generations. You see a young bard practicing verses, voice trembling as they rehearse the exaggerated stories of intimacy and endurance. Golden highlights on their manuscript reflect flickering torchlight, reinforcing the sacredness of memory and the blending of aesthetic beauty with moral instruction. Even a single intimate act, when embedded in narrative, becomes a moral parable. Courage, loyalty, or folly magnified through time. A king's bedroom, now empty, still holds the aura of ritual significance. Tapestries depict mythical precedents, ancestral behaviors, and divine oversight. Observers long after the events interpret these spaces as symbolic markers, connecting mundane reality with transcendent ideals. The odd detail: some chambers included carved reliefs of animals, stories passed orally or written in codices encode lessons, social norms, and heroic archetypes, influencing generations of rulers, warriors, and citizens. Scholars still argue whether the moral lessons derived from such stories were intentionally crafted or naturally emerged from human fascination with heroic excess and human desire. In the quiet aftermath, you sense the blending of human and divine observation. Gods, mythic ancestors, and heroic spirits loom over memory, casting judgment or admiration. Tales of eccentric rituals, tests of endurance, and unusual behaviors illustrate not only personal character, but also societal expectations, highlighting how even the most private acts were never truly isolated. You witness storytellers and philosophers carrying these legends into public spaces, at festivals, symposiums, and courts, where tales of bedroom rituals, the cycle of observation, narration, and reinterpretation, perpetuates itself endlessly, transforming reality into legend, ritual into cultural memory. Finally, the narrative slows, and you feel the soft hum of reflection. You wander through corridors of thought, tracing connections between private habit, public legacy, and the eternal human fascination with heroism, virtue, and the bizarre. The echoes of these acts, magnified by time and story, create an enduring reminder: what happens behind closed doors shapes worlds far beyond their walls. As night settles softly around you, you drift through images of flickering firelight, quiet halls, and empty chambers, the golden highlights of tapestries and walls glowing faintly. You can almost hear the distant laughter of ancient courts, the soft shuffle of attendants, and the murmured advice of sages long gone. Let your mind rest on the delicate balance between human curiosity, heroic excess, and the gentle pulse of narrative memory. Even the oddest rituals find their place in the mosaic of culture and story, a reminder of how personal acts ripple outward into legend. Close your eyes, feel the warmth of imagined hearths, and let the soft shadows lull you into calm reflection, where whispers of history gently fade into serenity. End of script. Sweet dreams.